What would you do if your younger brother got a brand new car for graduating and you got a rent bill? What if your parents smiled as they handed it to you, like it was a reward you were supposed to thank them for? And what if, years later, you discovered they had quietly stolen tens of thousands left to you by the only person who ever believed in you, your grandmother? This is the story of Riley Samuels, a daughter dismissed, a sister overlooked, a quiet storm that nobody saw coming until the silence broke everything. She didn't leave with a fight. She left with a folded letter and a duffel bag. What she uncovered after walking away would shatter a family and rebuild something far more powerful. But the real question is, how many of us are living lives we never agreed to simply because we were told to stay quiet? If that question makes your heart beat a little faster, then this story is for you. Tap like, hit share, and subscribe to our channel. Now let's begin. I left at 4:12 a.m. on a Sunday. Not with drama, not with shouting, just with my breath held and my heart finally still. The porch light buzzed as I stepped out, casting a dull yellow glow that made the lawn look brittle. I had one duffel bag, my laptop, 3 notebooks, and a gold chain that used to belong to my grandmother. That was it. 23 years of being good, being quiet, being dependable packed into one bag and a choice I couldn't unmake. But it didn't start that night. It started 12 hours earlier, with the sound of clinking silverware and a toast that didn't include me. Dinner was for Caleb, my younger brother. He had just graduated college business degree, full ride, some merit scholarships, plus a little help from Dad's mysterious education savings account. The table was dressed in a white linen cloth. The wine was poured into crystal glasses we only brought out on Christmas or when someone died. Apparently, the third occasion was Caleb doing what everyone had expected of him. "You didn't have to get me anything," Caleb said, blinking like he meant it. Dad chuckled, his arm draped over the back of Caleb's chair. "Nonsense. You earned it." My mother, Diane, smiled like her heart might burst. And then Dad stood up with that performative pause of his. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said, turning toward me, "and Riley. Since you're 23 now, working 2 jobs, doing really well, we think it's time you started contributing more. Rent will be $900 a month starting next Sunday." That word, contributing. It clanged louder than the fork Caleb dropped in surprise. Not because it was unexpected, it felt something like this coming for months, but because of how casual it was. Said with a smile, as if I should be grateful for the opportunity to pay rent in the house I grew up in, the same house Caleb lived in for free his entire college life. I looked at my plate. Cold roast beef, dry wine, my appetite gone. There was a pause. Not because anyone doubted Dad's decision, but because everyone was waiting to see how I'd take it. I smiled. Sure, makes sense. No one noticed how long it took me to blink, or how hard it was to keep my voice from cracking. Later, I stood in the kitchen alone, washing dishes no one asked me to wash. The soapy water bit at my fingers. I scrubbed the wine glasses that had toasted my brother's future, wondering if they'd ever been raised for mine. I looked out the kitchen window. The yard was dark, motionless. My heart wasn't broken. It was tired. That was the thing no one tells you about being invisible. It isn't that people don't see you. It's that they only see what you can give them. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan turning in clunky aijao. Uneven loops. My phone buzzed once. A congratulations text for Caleb? I didn't answer. I started doing math in my head. Rent, car insurance, groceries, student loan payments. What's left for emergencies? Nothing. What's left for savings? Even less. What's left for me? Absolutely nothing. And then the thought came quiet and steady. What if I left, not with a scene, not with a suitcase in the driveway, just left? I wondered, truly, how long it would take them to notice. That hurt more than the rent. At 2:47 a.m., I got out of bed, made tea, not because I wanted any, but because it gave me something to do with my shaking hands. I sat at the kitchen island, the same place I learned my multiplication tables, the same place I cried over rejection emails, the same place Dad once told me my jewelry making wasn't a real business. Outside, a motion sensor light flicked on. A raccoon? Probably. Inside, the kettle hissed, and suddenly everything was clear. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I was just going to leave. By 3:15, the bag was packed, laptop, charger, a velvet pouch with the silver rings I'd made and never worn, a stack of thank you notes from old customers, the poetry book Grandma Evelyn gave me before she passed, every third page dog-eared. I paused at the foot of my bed. My room was the same pale yellow it had been since I was 8. Twin bed, desk with chipped paint, a corkboard full of memories pinned like artifacts. This wasn't home anymore. It was just the place I'd stayed too long. At 3:54, Mum. I left a letter on the kitchen counter, not a goodbye note, not a cry for attention, just a folded piece of paper labeled for them. What was inside would come later. At 4:12, I stepped into the dawn of my own life. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my old bed, fully dressed, shoes on, staring at the ceiling as the world outside shifted from black to deep blue. My bag sat by the door, zip shut. I had triple-checked everything: laptop, chargers, ring pouch, journal, cash envelope, bus schedule folded like origami in my pocket. What was I waiting for? Nothing, and still something. Leaving wasn't the hard part. Not really. I'd done harder things. Cried silently through holidays. Swallowed bitterness like medicine. Chosen grace every time Dad credited Caleb for something I had done. I'd trained myself to disappear long before I physically walked out. What scared me was how easy it had become. At 5:12 a.m., I walked past the photo wall, 20 frames, hung with symmetrical pride, Caleb's graduation pictures, Caleb's soccer trophies, Caleb with Mom at a gala, Caleb with Dad shaking some politician's hand. I was there, too. Just once, middle row, far left, 5th grade spelling bee. My name misspelled in the caption. I almost laughed. In the kitchen. The envelope sat untouched, just where I'd left it. I imagined Mom finding it after her morning coffee. She'd skim it with one hand while stirring cream with the other. Dad would pretend not to care, but I knew that kind of silence. He'd be furious. Good. I poured myself one last cup of coffee. No sugar, no cream, bitter. Like the words I didn't say. The bus station was colder than I remembered. A line of vending machines hummed in the corner. A woman in scrubs slept with her head against her suitcase. A man in a baseball cap read the Bible silently, lips moving without sound. I paid in cash, one-way ticket, a town 4 states over. It wasn't random. My destination was Brighton, a college town where my grandmother's best friend Aunt Lydia still lived. She wasn't really my aunt, but after Grandma Evelyn passed away, Lydia sent me a card every birthday. No one else ever did. She used to say, "If you ever need a soft place to land, you have one." I figured now qualified. I didn't text her yet, not until I was on the bus, not until we were out of the county, and I could breathe without waiting for Dad's name to flash on my phone. The first leg of the ride was quiet. I stared out the window, fields passing like flickering memories. At some point, I reached into my bag and pulled out the little velvet pouch. Inside were 5 rings sterling silver, hand-molded, tiny initials carved inside each band. I had made them during the lockdowns, selling them on Etsy under the name R, Samuel's Designs. Dad used to call them fidget toys for hipsters. They had paid for my textbooks last semester. By the 3rd hour on the road, my body started to relax, but my mind wouldn't. I kept replaying the last 3 years. The missed birthdays, the ignored ideas, the good grades that barely registered. I thought about the time I got accepted into a national fellowship program, and Caleb had crashed his car the same day. Guess which story got told for weeks? It wasn't that they hated me. That would have been easier. They just didn't value me. Not unless I was useful, quiet, compliant. The night before I left, after Dad had dropped the rent bomb, I went back to my room and cried for exactly 4 minutes. Then I opened my journal and made a list titled "What I Will Take." 1, my laptop. 2, my jewelry tools. 3, my poetry book. 4, Grandma Evelyn's necklace. 5, my name odds, not the name they knew. Not Riley the responsible. Just Riley, whole, tired, still standing. By the time the bus stopped in Brighton, it was 4:42 p.m. and raining. Not the dramatic, stormy kind of rain, but soft and constant, the kind that makes you want to start over. Lydia was already waiting. She stood just outside the terminal doors in a blue raincoat and gray knit hat, holding a cardboard sign that said, "This way to freedom." I choked on a laugh. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me in for a long hug that smelled like rosemary and soap. "You look like hell," she said gently. I nodded. I feel like freedom. That night, I slept in a real bed. No tension under the covers, no footsteps overhead, no ticking clock on the wall reminding me to perform, to shrink, to edit myself down to whatever made them most comfortable. I didn't wake up until nearly noon the next day. For the first time in years, I slept with the window open. The wind came in and didn't ask me to apologize for taking up space. It took me 3 full days to write the letter. Not the one I left on the kitchen counter. That one was short, almost surgical. This was the real letter, the one I needed to write for me. Lydia gave me space. She didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to hear the answers to. She just made tea, set down a warm bowl of something on the table, left books around the guest room I was staying in. On the 4th day, she placed a crisp yellow envelope in front of me and said, "When you're ready?" And I knew what she meant. I sat on her porch that afternoon, a breeze lifting the hem of my old flannel shirt. Pen in hand, I opened my notebook and started with 2 simple words, "Dear family." And then I didn't write a goodbye. I wrote a ledger. I wrote about the time I stayed up all night helping Caleb rewrite an essay he procrastinated on, only for him to win a scholarship and never mention my name. I wrote about when I got a job at 17 to help cover groceries, because Dad's hours had been cut. But no one thanked me. They just stopped asking. I listed every family dinner where my opinions were brushed aside, every time I was called too sensitive for speaking up, every time I gave up something so someone else could have more, every Christmas gift I paid for out of tips from the calf, every late-night walk to clear my head after being blamed for things I didn't do, every call for help I didn't make because I knew no one would answer. I itemized my grief. I logged my silence like a bank statement. Somewhere in the middle of the list, I wrote something I hadn't expected. I stopped asking for love when I realized I was easier to manage without it. That line broke me. I closed the notebook and cried. Not sobs, not the kind of weeping that demands attention. Just soft, aching tears. The kind you cry when you're finally honest with yourself. That night, over takeout and cheap wine, Lydia asked, "What did your dad mean when he said you should contribute more?" I told her everything. The dinner, the rent, the new car, the way Caleb had looked at me when Dad said those words like he was sorry, but not enough to say anything. Lydia didn't blink. Classic Michael. You knew him, knew of him. Evelyn never liked to talk about him much, but she kept notes, records, documents. That word documents made my stomach turn. The next day, Lydia pulled out an old leather box from her linen closet. Inside were things that smelled like cedar and time birthday cards, estate notes, a photo of me in kindergarten holding a stick insect with absolute delight, and a stack of handwritten journals. My grandmother's, neat cursive, dated entries, margins filled with notes in red ink. She kept everything, Lydia said, especially after your grandfather passed. She knew Michael had ambition. It took me an hour to realize what I was looking at. Bank records, legal copies of a trust, account numbers, letters to lawyers. A power of attorney form dated 3 weeks after I was hospitalized my senior year of high school. My name was everywhere, so was Dad's. I flipped to one page that made my hands go cold. If anything happens to me, Riley must be protected. Michael cannot be allowed to control this fund. The trust fund, the one no one had ever told me about. I had turned 21 2 years ago. If this was real, and it looked very real, I was supposed to have access to nearly $80,000 in educational savings and assets left by my grandmother. No one said a word, Instead, I'd been working 55 hours a week, rationing shampoo, skipping medical checkups, and selling handmade rings to keep up with student loan interest. Because someone my father had taken it? I stood up so fast, the chair scraped backward. Lydia watched me quietly. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm not broken either." That evening, I reread the letter I wrote to my family. Then I tore it in half, not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't enough. Truth wasn't the finish line, it was the starting gun. The new letter I wrote that night was sharper, simpler, more like a business document than a goodbye. I called it what it was: summary of unreturned investments, emotional and financial. And at the bottom, I signed only my first name. Because the rest of it, they never really earned. The phrase "she kept everything" took on new meaning the deeper I dug into Grandma Evelyn's journals. Each one was a mirror reflecting not just memories, but intentions, safeguards, warnings hidden in the margins, pages pressed with financial documents, letters drafted but never sent, small sticky notes like breadcrumbs in a maze she hoped someone would eventually find their way through. That someone, it turned out, was me. The trust fund was real. So real. It had a notarized signature, tax filings, and an annual interest report. My name, Riley Ann Samuels, was listed as sole beneficiary, created when I was 13, activated on my 21st birthday. Except I had never seen a dime. I flipped to one page Evelyn had labeled contingency. If Michael assumes control. It detailed her suspicion that my father might attempt to redirect funds using his role as power of attorney. She noted his history of pushing her into silence. She outlined steps for contestation, even referenced a lawyer named Marcus Tannen in Brighton, in case Riley ever comes to me with questions I'm no longer around to answer. My hands trembled holding the journal. Because I had gone to Evelyn once, I was 17, confused, overwhelmed. I had told her I felt like a stranger in my own house. She just said, "That's not your fault, baby. You're in the wrong story." Now I understood what she meant. Lydia stood quietly in the doorway of her study, watching me. "You saw it coming, didn't you?" I asked. She nodded slowly. I didn't know how far it would go, but I knew Michael never liked the idea of a daughter having more power than he could control. I sat down, journal still open on my lap. "He took everything," I whispered. "Every chance she tried to give me." Lydia walked over and rested a hand on my shoulder. "And now you have something he never counted on. What's that evidence? And options?" I spent the next 2 days in a fog of discovery. Evelyn's journals revealed more than numbers. She talked about my kindness, my quiet strength, the way I used to sit by her bed when her arthritis flared up and read her poetry Rumi. Mostly, she had believed in me. Really believed. It stunned me to realize that someone had, even if they hadn't lived to see me rise. When I finally called Marcus Tannen, his voice was calm but direct. "Cases like this are rare," he said, "but not impossible to reverse, especially with thorough records. Which it sounds like your grandmother left in spades." "She did," I said, my voice low. "She didn't trust him, and she was right." Tannen sighed. "The first step is freezing the assets while we investigate. Do you have any documentation that shows misuse?" I reached into the file Evelyn had kept, pulled out a transfer form for educational savings. My signature was at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. I hadn't seen that form in my life, but the signature looked close, too close. Not perfect. The R was wider. The loop of the Y was too tight. A detail I remembered from years ago surfaced. Caleb had once bragged about forging my signature to sneak into a school play when he forgot his permission slip. He'd laughed about it. I hadn't now. I was staring at proof that wasn't a harmless joke. It was theft. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on Lydia's balcony in a blanket, moonlight making silver out of everything. I thought about all the late shifts, all the textbook rentals, all the missed chances because I was scraping by while Caleb had what a clean conscience, or just no conscience at all, at. The next morning, I called Marcus again. "I want to move forward." I told him. All of it. The fraud, the forged documents, the stolen inheritance. I don't care how long it takes. There was a pause. Are you prepared for what that means? Riley, I am. He cleared his throat. Okay, then it's time to let the system work. Your grandmother set this up to protect you. Now we'll make sure it actually does. By noon, we had submitted a formal complaint. By evening, Michael Samuels would receive a letter that would knock a crack into the concrete palace he'd built on top of my silence. And deep down, I hoped he felt it. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. Before I went to bed, I pulled out Evelyn's necklace from the bottom of my bag. I hadn't worn it in years, not since her funeral. I put it on. The gold was warm against my skin when I was little. I thought silence meant safety. If the house was quiet, maybe Dad wasn't in one of his moods. If Caleb wasn't yelling, maybe I hadn't disappointed anyone that day. If Mom didn't speak, maybe she agreed with me. Maybe she just didn't know how to say it. But silence isn't peace. It's just the sound a wound makes when no one is willing to look at it. 3 days after Marcus filed the complaint, the trust account was frozen. Michael Samuels, the man who once lectured me about financial maturity, was notified by certified mail that he could no longer access any assets under my name, not without appearing in court. He didn't respond, not to the letter, not to the phone call from the investigator, not even to the courtesy email Marcus sent as a formality. Instead, my mother called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Riley. Her voice cracked, brittle and distant. Please, your father's not himself. This has disrupted everything. We need to talk. I leaned against the counter, heart steady for the first time in weeks. Disrupted or exposed? A pause. Baby, this is tearing the family apart. No. Mom, the truth is, I just stopped being the glue. That afternoon, Lydia found me curled up on the back porch with my laptop open, watching the family's social media implode. The cheerful family Christmas photos from last year were getting new comments. Caleb's graduation post now had replies like, "Must be nice when your sister pays your tuition." Sounds like Dad's little empire isn't as squeaky clean as it looked. I had said nothing publicly. I didn't need to. The documents were doing all the talking. Still, it rattled me. Not because people knew the truth, but because I wasn't used to being seen. That night, my phone buzzed again. Caleb. His name on the screen made my throat tighten. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. On the 4th, I answered. Riley. His voice was small. Scared. What do you want? Caleb, I don't know how bad this looks. I didn't know Dad forged stuff. I swear. I let the silence hang. But you knew the money wasn't yours. I said finally. He didn't deny it. I didn't know what to do. I was 18. He told me it was fine. That you were taking too long. That it was better for the family if I finished school first. And you believed him I wanted to. That, at least, felt honest. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. I just asked one question: if Grandma Evelyn had left you that money. And I took it, without telling you, how long would it have taken you to call the police? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. By the end of the week, the local news picked up the story. Daughter files financial fraud complaint against father, trust mismanagement alleged. There was no picture, no quotes, just facts, but that was enough. By Friday, Michael had been removed from 2 local business boards, one by quiet vote, the other by formal announcement. I heard about it from Margaret, the owner of the local bookstore, when Lydia and I stopped in for coffee. Looks like your family's starting to learn the difference between legacy and leverage, she said with a knowing look. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how many people like me never get this far. How many girls lose their inheritances, their confidence, their time without ever knowing what was stolen. The legal system doesn't always work. I knew that. But this time, I had something rare: a paper trail, a persistent lawyer, and a dead woman who had left a roadmap. I whispered a thank you to Evelyn, then opened my notebook and wrote down 3 things. I am not what they said I was. 2, I am not what they feared I would be. 3. I am becoming something they never imagined. Marcus called the next morning. You should know, he said. Your father finally responded, not to me. Through his attorney. What did he say? He's proposing mediation. Wants to settle. I didn't answer right away. He added, that means he knows he can't win in court, and he's afraid of what else. Well, fine. I smiled to myself, the first real smile in weeks. Then let's not stop. The rain started just as we pulled up to the house. Of course it did. Lydia parked at the curb. I hadn't asked her to come, but she insisted on driving. Not to stand by my side, just to make sure I didn't walk into that house alone. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the place I used to call home. The lawn was overgrown. The shutters were peeling. One of the porch lights had burned out. It looked like a house abandoned by time, but really, it had just been abandoned by truth. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, folder in hand. Inside the folder, Marcus's official complaint, copies of the forged documents, Evelyn's original trust paperwork, a formal request for public apology and written acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Not revenge, just receipts. I knocked once. The door opened too quickly. Michael Samuels stood in the entryway, grayer than I remembered. In a faded sweater he wouldn't have been caught dead in 6 months ago. His face tightened. So you're here. I nodded. May I come in? He stepped aside without a word. The living room was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just taller now, heavier with perspective. The fireplace was cold. The mantel was empty, no photos, no awards, just a dent where Mom's antique clock used to sit. Dad dropped into his recliner like it was a throne he no longer fit into. You're not going to find what you're looking for, he said. I'm not here for what you think. I replied, I'm not here for your guilt or your approval. He scoffed. Then what do you want? I sat across from him. I want you to tell the truth. I want you to admit what you did, not just to me, but to Mom, to Caleb, to every person you used my silence to impress. He leaned forward. You have no idea how the world works. No, I said, calm as a knife. You just assumed I wouldn't learn. I slid the folder across the coffee table. He didn't reach for it. Everything you took, I continued, started with the belief that I wouldn't fight you, that I'd keep cleaning up dishes while you gave away my future like it was pocket change. You're being dramatic. No, I said, softer now. I'm being exact. The silence stretched. A storm of unsaid things rumbled just beneath our words. Then he looked up. You always were the smart one. Smarter than Caleb. Smarter than your mother. Maybe smarter than me. That caught me off guard, not because it was a compliment, but because it was the first honest thing he'd said. Then why did you spend your whole life trying to make me feel like I wasn't enough? He stared at the fireplace like it might answer for him. Because you were too much, he said at last. Too sharp, too steady. You reminded me that I wasn't the man I pretended to be. He chuckled, bitter, empty. And I hated you for that. I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up. Well, I said, that's your burden now. You get to sit here with everything you built and everything it cost you. He looked smaller in that chair than I had ever seen him, a man surrounded by things he couldn't control anymore. Before I reached the door, he called after me. The house your mother wants to donate it, to the women's shelter. I stopped, turned slowly. Good, let something useful come out of this place. Outside, Lydia was still waiting. She didn't ask what happened, just started the engine. How do you feel? She asked gently. I looked at the driveway as it shrank in the rearview mirror. Lighter, I said, and sad. Those things can live together. I know. By the end of the month, Marcus finalized the settlement agreement. Michael signed an official written confession, agreed to return the trust funds, and stepped down from every remaining business position he held. He would perform court-mandated community service and attend counseling as part of the restitution. Caleb, now sober and working part-time at a local construction firm, sent me a handwritten apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Mom moved in with her sister 2 towns away. Started therapy, started painting again. She texted me a photo of her first canvas. It was a field of wildflowers. Underneath, she wrote learning to grow without being trimmed. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I saved the image and sent her back a single emoji. It was a beginning. 2 years later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium with a microphone clipped to my collar and a small card in my hand. On the screen behind me, bold white letters read, "Breaking the Silence Financial Abuse Starts at Home." I took a deep breath, scanned the audience rows of young professionals, students, social workers, advocates, and said the words that still made my throat tighten. My name is Riley Samuels, and I want to tell you how I disappeared from my own life and how I found my way back. The applause after I finished wasn't thunderous. It was warm, human. People lined up to talk. Some asked questions about the legal process. Others just cried and said, "Thank you." That was my family, too. One woman whispered, "I thought I was crazy. Turns out I was just being gaslit." Another handed me a folded note my brother stole my student loan refund. No one believed me. Thank you for giving my story a voice. When I left that stage, I didn't feel famous or brave. I felt steady. And for someone who spent years walking on emotional eggshells, steady was revolutionary. After the settlement, I used part of the recovered trust funds to launch a nonprofit with Lydia, Marcus, and Margaret from the bookstore. We called it Second Legera, a name that honored both the betrayal and the accounting of truth. It offered legal support, counseling referrals, and educational workshops for people who had been financially manipulated by family, young adults, elderly parents, survivors of coercive control, the invisible ones. We started with 5 clients, and by our second anniversary, we had served over 300. My favorite days were still Thursdays at the Book Nook. That's where it all began, and oddly, where something else quietly bloomed. Jason. He was a third-grade teacher who came in every Saturday to grade papers and buy the same order black coffee and a blueberry muffin. For months, we just exchanged nods and "how's your day?" Then one day, I caught him reading a memoir about generational trauma. I said, "That one wrecked me." He looked up and said, "Then I'm reading it." Right. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, then every weekend after. When I told him my story start to finish, he didn't try to fix anything. He just said, "You didn't get small? They made the walls close in." I fell in love with that kind of clarity. Caleb and I talk once a month now. He's building furniture in a small town an hour away. No more Escalade, no more pretending. He apologized in a letter during rehab, not just for taking the money, but for being too weak to question how easy it was handed to him. He's working on paying some of it back. I told him he didn't have to. He said, "I need to." For me, that mattered. Mom lives in a small townhouse with her sister, 2 cats, and a porch garden that somehow survives her black thumb. She goes to therapy twice a week, started attending art classes again. When I visited last fall, there was a watercolor painting of a house on the wall. Not our house, but one with the windows thrown open and light pouring out. "It's what I wish it had felt like," she said softly. "We're rebuilding something, not what we had, but what could have been. Something honest." And the house, the one I left at 412 Azir Mem with a single duffel bag and a letter, it's no longer the Samuels house. It's now Evelyn House, a transitional home for women and children leaving financially abusive situations. On the front porch is a plaque with a quote from one of Grandma Evelyn's journals. "Sometimes the strongest legacy is the one that ends a cycle." That, she did. So did I. My memoir was published 6 months ago. The ledger I left behind became a quiet bestseller, not for fame, but because people recognized themselves in the margins. Every city I visited on the book tour, someone would approach with a quiet story. A father who stole his daughter's credit. A sibling who emptied a joint bank account. A mother who borrowed from her child's future to keep someone else's ego fed, every time. I handed them a card for Second Ledger and said the same thing Evelyn once told me. "You're not in the wrong, you're just in the wrong story. Let's rewrite it." I visited her grave last month, read her one of my favorite poems, the same one I used to whisper to her when her hands hurt too much to hold a book. Then I said, "Thank you for leaving the map." And I meant it. Because I hadn't just survived. I had become Some nights, I think about that girl who scrubbed dishes after a dinner she didn't belong to, the girl who made jewelry in secret, the girl who smiled through silence and thought her value depended on being small. She's gone, but I'm here, and I stayed gone for good. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who claim to love us most when they choose control over care, silence over truth, and pride over justice. Riley didn't burn bridges. She walked away from the ones that were already crumbling quietly, powerfully, and on her own terms. She turned betrayal into boundary, inheritance into independence, and pain into a purpose that now protects others from ever feeling that same invisible theft. Her story reminds us love without respect is just manipulation dressed in tradition. And family, real family, should never come with a price tag. To anyone who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told their voice was too loud, too soft, or not worth hearing, know this. Your value isn't measured by what they take from you. It's revealed by what you reclaim. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Because the stories we tell, they don't just entertain, they empower. And trust us, you won't